Hi everyone, good Wednesday afternoon and welcome to GoLocal Live. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in for the latest news and politics here in downtown Providence. The latest in politics, Senator Jack Reed just spoke with GoLocal for his reaction to President Donald Trump's remarks on the latest with Iran. You can check that out on GoLocal very shortly. But I'd like to welcome in my guests now from New York. I have a familiar face, Ted Siedle, SEC whistleblower, the biggest in history, joined by his co-author Robert Kiyosaki, Who Stole My Pension and How You Can Stop the Looting. Now, Who Stole My Pension, we spoke with Ted about before. I've got both co-authors on today. So gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So we've spoken with Ted, and we'll get back to him in a second. But while we have you, Robert, here you're a darling of the stock exchange down in New York while you were on Cheddar this morning. Talk about how the two of you came together to decide to write this book.
That's me. Well, that's a great question, simply because this is the book here, is Who Stole My Pension? And the back of it says, why are there two authors? And the reason there's two authors is two kinds of pensions. Ted's the expert as SEC attorney on defined benefit for teachers, firefighters, and police officers. And I'm an expert on defined contribution, which people know as a 401k or the IRA. The reason we came together is both types of pensions are being looted by Wall Street. So the fact that Wall Street lets us on the floor was amazing.
That was going to be my next question. I mean, it's like you went into the heart of the conflict. I mean, who you're calling out for those fees. What has the reception been from Wall Street? You were talking with experts this morning, basically saying the mismanagement by those who manage the plans and those high fees are what's putting these pensions at risk. What's the response been from Wall Street?
Well, I think everybody, it's bipartisan. Everybody knows that Wall Street is screwing Americans. And one of the great things about the book is it's global. So we talk about Japan, Australia, UK, France, Croatia even. And this is happening all over the globe. And the foreign countries, foreign pensions are just beginning to start buying the toxic garbage that Gina loaded up your state pension fund with. Hedge funds, private equity funds, all this crap is now being bought up by foreign pensions, and it's all made in America.
So what you're essentially saying in this book, you speak to these high fees. I know you've mentioned, Ted, Rhode Island's in there quite a bit. If Wall Street's not going to be getting these fees from what you're advising and it needs to be better managed, let's talk about that second part of the book, how you can stop the looting. As you said, thousands of pre-sales right now. I'm sure a number of retirees want to know how they can take an active role.
Well, I wrote the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad because my poor dad was the head of education for the state of Hawaii, an academic. And as you know, our school system teaches us nothing about money, which is one of the biggest problems there is. And my rich dad was my best friend's father. So he taught me how to avoid Wall Street. So I was able to retire at a very young age simply because I don't have a pension. And my poor dad became poor, and the same as Ted in his book, when his father didn't get, because his father was killed, his family didn't receive a pension. And my poor dad, the head of education for the state of Hawaii, ran for lieutenant governor as a Republican in the Communist Republic of Hawaii. And as people in Hawaii know, if you're a Republican in Hawaii, they exterminate you. So they exterminated my father at the age of 50, and he lost his pension. And so every time I talked to my poor dad, he kept saying, well, you got to get a job with a pension. And that was a change of direction in my life at that point. So I said, I will never want or need a pension. I don't care if it's a 401k or a government pension.
And Ted, tell us a little bit as well. You talk often with retirees here in Rhode Island, of course, who have concerns about how pension reform played out, what the performance has been to date, and of course, we see the politics interplay with it as well. So let's talk a little bit about that. The book comes out January 14th. But again, this big caveat, this big role, how you can stop the looting. How can people stop the looting?
Yeah, well, for people who have a pension, it is, in the words of Mark Twain, if you have all your eggs in one basket, you need to watch that basket. And for people who have a pension, that is typically where all their eggs are. And so what we talk about in the book is things that they can look for at their pension. So there are chapters about how your pension is lying about the fees it pays, which we know in Rhode Island. When I arrived on the scene, the pension said they were paying $10 million in fees. Within 6 months, I forced them to disclose they were actually paying $80 million in fees. Another chapter is your pension is lying about its performance. There's never been a pension that I've investigated, and as you know, I've investigated over 1 trillion pensions. There's never been one that said our performance sucks. So there's got to be some that are laggards, but no pension ever admits it. There's also sections about that your pension is lying about the risks it takes. Your pension is becoming less transparent. So these are pretty much universal truths. Pensions all over the world are being plagued with these issues. And the book tells readers these are the things to look out for because there are scams going on at every pension, and that's the looting.
So do you expect, I mean, here we are in Rhode Island, we're going to be coming into an election year for the general treasurer and governor in 2022. Do you expect well-informed voters, and especially that particular electorate, to be able to impact change, to be able to demand transparency, to make this a de facto campaign issue more than it's ever been?
Well, I think the issue of transparency is something that everybody globally agrees that greater transparency is good. And what we've had in Rhode Island and around the country is that state public records laws, transparency laws, Freedom of Information Act laws have been eviscerated by people like your governor.
And do you think this book is a, go ahead.
These are the,
I'll let you go. These are the.
Let's go back to the transparency law required before Gina got onto the scene.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk a little bit. Do you think this is a tipping point? You go through the book, you point to both the domestic and international examples of what you see as problematic, what you know is problematic. Does this book really have the capacity, again, getting folks to know A, what's going on, but B, affect change?
Well, the reason there's two authors, again, is because you have a defined benefit, which is what my poor dad wanted as head of education. And then there's the rest of the people who have a defined contribution or 401k. Now, what Who Stole My Pension describes here is when people realize that the defined benefits, the ones that Ted investigates, have been looted, it's going to bring down the stock market, which will damage all those 401ks and IRAs. And for the millennials and for the baby boomers, it's going to affect all of them. It's going to be a real estate issue. Who's going to move in with who? Is the millennial going to move in with mom and dad, or mom and dad going to move in with the millennial? And I think that's why this book, Who Stole My Pension, has no age barriers to there. The reason Ted and I wrote it is there's things you can do now before the biggest crash in world history comes. We had a subprime mortgage crash in 2008, and why Ted and I have joined forces, we have a subprime pension crisis about to hit us.
And you say the biggest. Is this bigger than the subprime mortgage crisis?
Much bigger, much bigger. Just look at student loan debt. Student loan debt is 1.6 trillion. It's already bigger than all the subprime mortgages. I mean, Wall Street, the Fed, and the U.S. Treasury have done nothing but rip us off. Just rip us off. It's not Democrat or Republican. It's a bunch of crooks hanging out, sucking the cash out, and they'll be long gone when you're standing in line at the soup kitchen.
And so, Robert, you mentioned you're a darling on the stock exchange floor. Let's talk about your popularity with millennials. What do you hear from the younger generation with this realization of what they're facing. Obviously, seeing that baby boomer generation and their parents goes back to the crux of the first book that you wrote. Are millennials really tapped into what this issue means, both, not just for their parents, but for them?
The millennials are much more aware that they've been screwed, if the scientific term is. And so a guy like me steps up and says, "You've been screwed." And they go, "Oh, thank you for telling me. I already knew that." And so what I think they like is not that garbage that CNBC and Wall Street puts out, save money, invest in a well-diversified portfolio, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. When you look at the stats in the book, Who Stole My Income, the average baby boomer who is going to retire with a 401k, they're screwed also. They just don't know it yet. But the millennials are well aware of it. They're in deep student loan debt, and they know Social Security. I'm Japanese. It's not called Social Security in Japan. It's called Social Security. Social Security is broke also. So millennials are wide awake. It's their parents who are sound asleep.
So let's talk about the receptivity to this book again in the heart of New York City and again Wall Street. What have you been hearing from folks on the ground? Thousands in pre-orders. Let's get a little anecdotal. People coming up to you saying what?
Well, I think the crux of the book is that we have this demographic wave that's happened. And so we have I think 2 billion people globally over the age of 65 in the near future. So that's unprecedented. We have the greatest number of elderly people on this planet in history. And that's the good news, that people are living longer. The bad news is that 99.9% of them don't have the savings to survive decades in retirement. So it's a very bleak picture for most people. And we're hearing stories like last night we had dinner with some of the Teamsters truck drivers who had their pensions slashed from like $5,000 a month to $800 a month. So across the country, we're hearing from people who know the pain of losing their pensions.
So the good news is that Rhode Island kind of leads the whole United States. The bad news is you're leading the rest of the states and the world. So what's happened in Rhode Island is now happening in Japan, Australia, Europe, all over the world. And as this book, Who Stole My Pension, says, on the back cover, what is America's #1 export? And the #1 export are toxic assets. We exported subprime mortgages in 2008. Now we're exporting subprime pensions for the next crash. It's going to be the biggest crash ever. So that's why you want to read now and prepare for what's about to hit you. So we have solutions, but you first have to understand the problem of both defined benefit, which Ted is the expert on, and I'm more on the 401k IRA side. So this is a global problem, and Rhode Island leads the way.
And so here you are, New York City. Where can we expect you through 2020? I have the feeling you guys will be some fairly popular guys.
Well, it depends on who we talk to.
Yes.
Ted and I were so surprised that the guys we were actually in the store, the floor of the Wall Street Journal, talking about this. We may as well have been in ISIS country talking about we love Donald Trump. You know what I mean?
That unpopular, yes.
Well, I think people are aware that this is a growing concern, and like Robert said, Rhode Island has sort of led the way. Kate, maybe your listeners don't know this, 50% of all state and local pensions in the United States have cut benefits to workers in the last 10 years. Since the 2008 meltdown, 50% of all government pensions have cut benefits. So it's not just Rhode Island led the way, Gina showed the way down that road, but most of the country followed suit.
And the biggest crisis is across the country in a state called California. The People's Republic of California is called CalPERS. They're underwater several $1 trillion. So Rhode Island is just a blip compared to California. So, that saying, go west, young man. The farther west you go, the worse it gets.
Well, I appreciate the two of you taking the time to Skype in with us here in downtown again. Ted gave us a bit of a preview back in November, but Robert, to have you on as well to talk about Who Stole My Pension, how you can stop the looting, again, identifying the problem and presenting some possible solutions. So Ted, Siedle, and Robert Kiyosaki, thank you for taking the time to Skype in. We'll put up a link. Again, that book will be available on January 14th. Of course, we'll let folks know where they can purchase it. So gentlemen, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to let them go, and we're going to wrap up here with GoLocal Live. But of course, again, go on GoLocal. Check out GoLocal's interview with Senator Reid following President Trump's speech this morning. We look forward to seeing you for more live soon. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel.